And off we go. Okay. Let me share my screen, and maybe one of you can tell me if you're able to see it.
Yeah, I can.
All right, so this is a continuation of the first talk we had about 2 weeks ago. And the intent of this presentation is not that I talk for a whole hour. It's really to expose tips and tricks that I use when I'm working on portals, as well as to hear from you what you do if you're already using Portal, or questions around where we start if you are going to use portals. Again, my name is Victor Dantas. I'm a Power Platform consultant. If Microsoft rebrands the product, I'll be called something else, maybe next month, but we'll go with the flow. I also work as a 365 Saturday ambassador. This is a non-profit job and probably the part of the job that I like the most. Be able to present at community events, not only present but also assist people who wants to host events in their hometown. So yeah. So last time we talked about how to provision portals. We talked about the CMS and multi-language support, CSS branding and samples. Then we looked at site settings, site markers, content snippets, and we stopped there. Is there anybody in the group that would like to see any of those three topics real quick? Or
I would like to see something about branding, if
Brandy?
possible.
Okay. Anybody would like to see how to provision portals, or is everybody comfortable with that part?
Yeah. Hey, Victor, I would like to see something about it, but if that was delivered last time, I think that you should keep going and we can look at that
It's
later.
okay.
So,
It's okay. We can still talk about it real quick and then move on to the other stuff. Hi, Jen. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for adding about 200 tons of pressure to this presentation. Now, just kidding. So Jim Novak is an MVP. He's very versed on portals. One of the I joke around on my presentations that I follow some stars on LinkedIn. Jim is one of them. He's a great individual. On top of that, so if you don't have Jim in your LinkedIn circles, it's a great ad to your LinkedIn profile. So, all right, Hockey, we'll quickly look into provisioning. It's not going to take us much time, but what you do essentially is you go to make.powerapps.com. That's going to ask you for your creds. I'm using my own company's cred, and I also have different environments here. One cool thing that I found out the other day is that you can provision a community environment on Power Apps. That way you can play with your own apps and try stuff before bringing it to your corporation. So it's there are some limitations there. You cannot add like the customer service product or add-on to your CDS. You cannot add sales. You cannot add any of that. And on top of this, your environment is only available for you. You cannot have other users access your environment. So even with the limitations, I really like that possibility because then I can play with all sorts of cool stuff before I implement it on my company's environment if I have to, or a customer environment that I may be working on. So the way to provision Hockey, I'll share with you the community link later on. But there are two main areas that you're gonna play with nowadays. So the main one is make.portalapps.powerapps.com. The second one is admin.powerapps.com. Admin.powerapps.com will allow you to create environments as well as manage existing environment. So you can click new environment. Once it's done, you can then access the environment, and there will be a button here to create your CDS database if you haven't yet. and that's how the model entities will be available for you once you create the database. Then you can come back to the make.apps, PowerApps.com, and start playing with the apps you want to create. This works for both. Again, you can see here model-driven apps, the ones that will be used in Dynamics, also Power Apps, Canvas app, as well as portals. So far, so good, Hockey.
Yep.
So once that's done, once your environment's ready, if you want to create a portal, you can click here, give it a name, give it a subdomain name, and hit create. If you do it from here, you get a blank portal. So a portal that's still connected to Dynamics, that you can still use entities from Dynamics, but it doesn't have any of the template options that you get from other types of portals. If you want to use a portal that has a little bit more functionality from the get-go, you're going to use community or customer service, partner, so on and so forth. Just know that these 4 options will only appear for you if you have the customer service app installed in your Dynamics that's connected to this environment. So again, going back to what I said about the community version, you will not be able to get any of these apps or these portal templates if you try to create a portal from the community environment. So far, so good?
Perfect.
All right. So once the portal is up, let me go back here. I should probably close this guy. So once portal is up, this is what portals will look like, sort of. I already made a few changes to the CSS, but that's essentially what you get. And if you're using the previous components for CMS managed, that's what it looks like. I think a lot of you have seen this in the past. If you're logged on as an admin, you can hover over areas of the pages you're playing with, and then you can start making changes if you decide to use the legacy front-facing editor. Okay. For the new one, going back to make.powerapps.com, I'm going to list my apps. I can click on my portal app and click edit, and it will give me the new front face designer. So this designer is not really up to par yet in terms of functionality compared to the previous version. But there are a lot of cool things here. I mean, things that I like better than the previous one. So making changes, you can make a lot of changes and then save. It will auto save as you go, so you don't have to make one save and then make the other, save it again. So it will save as you go. The other cool thing is that you can make changes to your CSS from here. Okay, you can make some changes, hit save, and you'll be good to go. I'll show an example of a change. Now, one thing to keep in mind with the editor is if I save here, there's just no way for me to go back. So again, maybe the team who was responsible for this was the same team responsible for the forms design on the new CDS editors in Dynamics, that the same team missed the back button at the first go. So something to report for them to fix. If you were to do this in the previous front editor designer, you'd have to delete the file completely and upload a new one. And at times have to refresh the cache to get there. All right, so in terms of CSS branding, what I usually do is I look at what the customer wants as the end goal for their website, and then I try to find a template that looks the same or close to the same. So I use this site called bootswatch.com. and you want to use the version 3 because Portals is still using Bootstrap v3. So you have some options here. You can preview them to see if you like. All right, I like this. Go back. Then we can download the file. All right. In this scenario, if you're using the old version, you can save it somewhere. For my example, I will just copy this, and then I can go back to the editor and place it on that particular area I showed you. So that's how I usually go about it. Now, there are other things that you can do, but doesn't really relate to the portal technology as much as it does CSS styling. So you can use Google Chrome to inspect a particular component. So you see here, I can change the color to, let's see, something like that. Then instead of replacing the CSS completely, I can create just override files, CSS files, and upload it to the portal. Okay. The way that portal works is it will look for all CSS files in the root of the portal and load them in the sequence of creation. First of all, it will load the bootstrap.css, then whatever CSS files you have added afterwards, and then the latest CSS files will always will override whatever the previous one was doing. So you can do it that way as well. That way you don't really change much of the underlying CSS files that were created by Microsoft developers. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
All right. One other thing that I showed folks when they were here last time is a lot of companies they want to use uh, the previous look and feel for Bootstrap files. I don't know if you recall where the navigation bar is down below, and then you have the search text box up top. This can be achieved fairly easy on Portals. You can come here to the Portals website record that you're using. You can click and remove the header. For example, you can do the same for the footer if you want. And then come back here. Hopefully I don't have to refresh the cache. Oh, come on. Let me kill my camera, I guess. See if I get better results. And so you see that it changed the header of my website. So if I want now, I can go back to the editor and edit. Oh, selected the wrong app. Sorry, folks. Come on. Go back to the Bootstrap. This. Uh, this one instead. Place it. Save. Now again, the back button is not there. So we'll come back this way, refresh, and now I have the look and feel that I wanted. You see that not only that, but my font changed as well and other stuff on the portal. Questions so far? No? All right, we are moving on. So again, the the next thing we talked about last time was site settings, site markers, and content snippets. Everything you see on the portal is data driven. Just the way that the execution works, that is reliant on code, but a lot of it relies on data in dynamics. I'll give you an example. If I signed out, you see that there is one option here for Active Directory single sign-on that's driven by site settings. And any other external identity provider that you want to use can be added here using site settings. So without changes in code, you can do that as well. And the way to manage it is you can go to the portal model-driven app in Dynamics, access site settings, and then you can do things like Azure, and you see my Azure AD logins enabled. You see that I have two entries here because I have two portals. So you have a set of site settings for each individual portal. If you want to enable Facebook Connect, there you have it, and so on and so forth. Other things that are driven by site settings are local authentication. If you want to disable this particular box here where we store username and password within Dynamics, you can do as well. And one cool thing that I had to implement the other day for a customer was to completely bypass this sign-in screen and land on the external provider login. And what I mean by that is if you try to access an authentication required page, it pushes you to the external provider directly if you have one. Again, this is done by a site setting as well, and it's very easily configurable. I can provide that key for you guys if you ever need it down the line, as I cannot recall the name of the setting, but it's done through site setting, not necessarily any change in code that would require you to do that. The next thing was content snippets. Content snippets are the text that you see here on portals. You see how when I hover over certain areas, it shows home /title. So if you go back to the backend and if you search home, you see that there is a content snippet for that. And there are two types of content snippets. You have one that's text-based and one that's HTML-based. All right, so a lot of the contents that you build can be driven that way. Another cool thing is that the number of content snippet will vary based on the number of languages that you have enabled on your website. So in a country like Canada, where we are required by law to deliver, content in English and French, this come in handy. And for us developers, it's even better. I don't know how many of you have dealt with a situation where, through the requirements phase, your customer tells you that a label will be called something, and then you put there on the website as a static value, and then that value changes 300 times before delivery day, right? So the way you resolve that, you create a content snippet, set it to the language that you want, and then you give the freedom for the your power users should go to the front face editor or to any of the editors and make the changes themselves, so you don't have to do it for them. Okay. And site markers, it's an interesting thing, and not a whole lot of folks make use of them. But what it is let's say that you are coding a portal today, and you don't have much information on what a page should look like or where a particular path on your website should land to. So you can create a site marker, point it to a page that exists today, and then later on a power user or somebody else with understanding of dynamics can come here and say, well, now we know that the contact us should be pointing to whatever page, and make that change there instead of you having to change the site itself. So far, so good? Okay. So let's move on to today's topic. So today we're going to talk about entity forms, views, entity permissions a little, and liquid web templates. Before we dive into it, I want to show you guys one slide that to me it's probably the most important on the presentation. And this is very generic, and some of the terminology may have changed or is called something else interchangeably. So, but it's very important for you to understand the structure of a PowerApps portal internally before we dive into some of these more extensive components. So, a website itself is composed by web pages, web pages, site settings, content snippets, and web files. Now, a web page may have one web page localized record or multiple localized records depending on the number of languages you have configured or enabled on your website. And we'll have a look at that shortly here. Now, within that structure, a web page uses a page template. And what this is essentially what is the shell of what you are trying to present. You know, inherently, page templates can be rewrite based, and what it is a page template based on a physical ASPX file or MVC file in the backend. Now, this was very handy when during the times of ADX Studio because you could make changes in code and use those changes here on your portal. Now we don't have that freedom anymore where we can point, our pages to local files just because we don't know what they are. We don't know the infrastructure of the site behind. We don't know even if the technology remains to be, what it was in the past. A lot of ASP.NET forms, or even what version of the framework it's being used. So we don't have that freedom anymore. So essentially, all that we're gonna see today will be based on page templates that are created and configured using web templates. Now, some folks use the word web templates. Some other folks use the word liquid web templates or just liquid templates. When people refer to that way, it's pretty much the same thing. Okay. Then within a web page, you can have entity forms, entity views, or entity lists for that matter, and web forms. Today we'll not talk too much about web forms. Maybe we'll do it some other day. We'll limit this talk to entity forms, entity views, and liquid web templates. All right. Okay, so let's look at an entity form. So an entity form is essentially a way for us to expose a dynamics forms onto your through a portal page. If you look at my screen here, you see that I have about four entity forms. These forms were created by my template. I installed the customer service template in my environment, and that's why I have this form created for me. When you create a form, you notice a few things here. You give it a name, the name that you want, then you select the entity that your target form is based off. So if I look at account form, when I select the entity, it will give me a list of forms available in my Dynamics instance. So I can select one particular form, then it will allow me to select a tab. Now notice that this particular field is not required. So I can leave this blank, and what's going to happen if I leave it blank is when I render my form on my portal page, it will look for the first tab on my form and present that tab. Okay, So, but if I select one, then it's gonna default the presentation to the one that I selected. Now, one cool thing about this mechanism here is that I can leave it blank, and you see when I create my form, I'll just create it and then go to a few other settings just to show you something that I find cool. So this particular form has two tabs, right? If I leave it blank and I go to form options, and I say auto generates steps for tabs, what's gonna happen is when I display my form on on my portal, it will create somewhat of a wizard like presentation. So without me having to do a whole lot of work, I'll have a wizard with including all tabs that exist on my portal. All right, I can create a validation group. This way, this works very similar to the validation controls in ASP.NET Forms. Can decide whether or not I want to render web resources in line, and it's referring to web resources that you have in your Dynamics form. Now, this works for most of your web resources as long as the resources that you are using does not inflict the CORS restriction. And by CORS restriction, I mean a cross scripting uh, limitation between in this case between portals and dynamics. Does everybody understand this limitation? So what we are talking about here is you may have a web resource in Dynamics that uses the Dynamics Web API to query data or to save data. This type of web resource will not work on your portal form, okay? Because it works in Dynamics because the user that's using the form in Dynamics is authenticated. It has rights, may have rights to execute a web API call, but the portal itself does not have rights to execute that web API call. Okay, so that's what I'm referring to. But if you're using web resources that are very simple, it still works here. Uh, the other stuff is fairly easy to understand. You know, if you want to tooltip, if you want to use fields that are not supported, if you want to flag the recommended business recommended fields as required, this come in handy as well when you have a particular set of requirements for portals that's different than what you have in Dynamics. And I'll give you an example. Let's suppose that I have a form that for my external users, I want to force them to fill out all fields. But in Dynamics, I want to give the liberty to the users in Dynamics to just fill out a couple. So you mark them as recommended in Dynamics, but here, if you mark this checkbox, then the fields will be required on portals. Okay? You can also mark all fields that are displayed on the portal on the form to be required without this particular setting. Okay. Down here you have options to uh, pretty much provide a more personal experience to your users. You know, if you want to add content here that will make it easier for users to fill out forms, and if a record is not found, and if your form is read only or edit based, then you can add a message that's localized. Again, if my portal instance had more than one language, I would have multiple boxes here for each particular language. Okay. Moving on, I have an option when the form is saved, I want to display a success message or I want to redirect it to another location. And then I can pick a web page on the site or external URL. I have options here to append to the query string. So when the record is created, I want to navigate to another web page and add the ID of that record that I just created. So that's what's the settings here are talking about. So I'll leave as display success page. Then additional settings. I can change the name of the button depending on the type of forms that I'm dealing with here. I can navigate to the next form on my entity if this is an edit form. So if it's an edit form, I load the information and then I can add buttons to allow navigation between the two. If you want to activate, deactivate. Of course, none of these options will make sense if the type of form is insert, because I'm just creating the record, okay? But for the form types that are edit or read only, this makes a lot of sense. Okay, one cool option is if I'm creating a record and I want to set the entity reference, basically the relationship settings to this particular record, I can still do that post, saving my record. So let's say that I created an account and I want to associate that account with my username as the one who created it. I can do that by looking at the relationship name, the name of the entity, sorry, then the relationship that it's applicable to, and the attribute. Okay, if that lookup field is part of my form, I can also pre-populate that on load. Okay, and like I said in the beginning, I can remain going on a row, but if you have questions, you're welcome to ask. I by no means am in a hurry to complete this on time. We can have more sessions, but I really want you to get deep understanding of each component here. So if you have questions, please pose them. Okay, entity form metadata. This is a really cool area of entity forms. It's also available on entity lists. And what it does is it allows me to, sorry, I have to save my record first. Let me go back here. It allows me to format fields or add other options to components that exist in my form. So there are roughly six types of entity form metadata record that I can create. If I select attributes, I can then look for fields that exist on my form, and I can then format them. And if it's a text box, some of this stuff is not applicable, but if we are dealing with an option set, let me see if I can find one easily here. Right, this one, shipping method. So I can configure my drop down. Instead of showing as a drop down list, I can configure it to be a horizontal radio button list or vertical radio button list. There is an option here for multiple choice. This implies that I have multiple fields working here, not necessarily the multi option set field in Dynamics. My hope is that one day we'll get there. Okay. There is a single line of text as geolocation lookup validator, so on and so forth. There are lots of cool stuff. And again, this is just configuration, folks. Doesn't really require a whole lot of coding to make this happen. As you can see, I'm just selecting stuff and making it happen. Okay. When we look at entity lists, we'll look into a lot more on this entity form metadata using another type essentially called subgrid. So let me go back to my form. We'll discard changes. Don't want to make a lot of changes here. I will save. So my form is there. Then I'll go back to the site. I'll sign in. And then I'll add this form to my website. So the way I do that, I already have the entity form there. I'm going to create new child page, count simple. Then I have some page templates that I can use. I'll leave as page. Then I go to my entity form, select the one I created, save. And that should show my form. All right, let's wait a little. So you see that the disposition of my form is not the greatest, but you get the idea. Now I have a form here, and if I fill out the values and hit save, it's going to create an account record in my CRM database. My demo account record, phone number 9999. When I remember what I was talking about in regards to the tabs right in the beginning, I left the tab configuration blank, and because this form has two tabs, it just proceeded to the next tab on my form. All right, that's great. Let me fill out some data here. Make sure this all works. Still, we'll figure out later on why this is not selected. May have to do with permissions. Yeah, so if I go to entity permissions here, count, I'm gonna give myself rights. I have to refresh the cache on this one. Yeah. Services about. Well, there's something else going on, so we'll figure out and keep you posted on this one. Okay, but we can look at another example on entity forms. This one came with the demo itself. I can click to open a case. This is a form that exists in the backend associated with the case entity. Also, again, an entity form. Can go in here, create test case, select the contact. It's product based. Save. There must be something up with Dynamics. All right. Again, I'll look it up and see what's going on. Maybe permissions of the trial license I'm using is causing this issue. Anyhow, let's quickly move on to entity list. So we look at the presentation of the form. If we want to present a list based on Dynamics view, what you do is you come to this area of the Dynamics 365 portals model-driven app. For you folks, if you're starting today, you probably have it called PowerApps portals model-driven app. When you hit new, and this particular setup is very similar to the one for forms with a little bit of variation. But I'll call this one my sample account list. And I'll select my entity, the website I want to surface this, and I'll hit save here. Where is it missing? I have given you everything you need. Come on. Oh, account, customer service. Okay. Let's add the view name. Okay, that's what I was missing. So just as a side note, the view, at least one view is required. So now I have an entity view, an entity list, sorry, that's based on the account, active accounts view in Dynamics. If I go back to my page, the one that I added the entity form, I can now add a list instead of the form. So I'm gonna click edit, remove this form, select the list I created. Now instead of a form, I should have a list. Okay, now this is very cool. I have a list, but there isn't really much I can do with it. So I can add a lot of functionality here, like ability to add a new account, edit an account, add filtering capabilities to my list with configuration settings. So I will really cruise through these options here. Later on, maybe on another session we can talk more about it. But I can enable search. So now I have search enabled, and then I can decide what type of search I want to allow users to do on my on my um, on my entity list. So search is enabled. I can do metadata filtering as well. So I click enable, I decide which direction I want. I can do horizontal or vertical. If I do vertical, it adds a component to the side of my list. Okay, and I'll call this button search. And down below here, I decide what types or what options I want to give for my metadata filter option. So it can be static, it can be dynamic. So if I want to use a pick list option. So let me find a particular option set field here that I can use. The selection mode, you can decide whether you want a checkbox or radio buttons. Of course, if you do checkbox, you can have multiple options being filtered at one time. If you do radio button or drop down, it's one at a time. So let's do checkboxes. Save, go back to my list. I might need to clear the cache this time. Refresh. And there you have it. So if I click here and search, doesn't show anything. Preferred customer doesn't show anything. Maybe no accounts have those settings applied to it. But you get the idea. Now I can use also the wildcard search and search based on different criteria. It will bring back this account based on the filter. Again, this particular area here is driven by this search option. The other ones that you display to the side is driven by metadata filter. You can use also lookup fields for that and even fetch XML if you want to apply fetch XML to it. The entity list, though, can be rendered as a map as well as a calendar view. We'll not talk too much about it today, but you can experiment. And again, it's all based on settings. So depending on the data type and the information that you have on your database, it will automatically display the data nicely for you. Again, you can, yeah.
It is Jim.
Hey, Jim.
Any method for, so the filtering stuff is really cool. It brings up some cool dialogues, allows you to filter based on static stuff in the configuration. Have you come across a method for doing that dynamically?
I've tried to do it in the past. You mean like using the operator value as something that's dynamic driven?
Yeah, basically, I want to say, based on a related contact record, show me only certain values. Like apply that to my fetch, for example.
Yeah, I've seen it. There was a guy who posted it. I haven't implemented it, but there was a guy who posted it yesterday on how he did that using JSON to give the result for filtering.
Oh, okay. So you apply it client side.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was trying to do it on the server side.
Well, but he's applying client side in a way that he's requesting the data on the server side using that. Remember, last time in New York, I was showing how to render liquid with as JSON.
The service call, yeah. So
Yeah.
he
So
just did that. He overrode the column. Okay, because the other method I was thinking of is overriding using an entity view in Liquid, but that means I have to re-render the grid too, and I don't want to do that.
yeah, that's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a cool example that I was using, but it's not quite 100%. I just didn't know if there's a way to, like, in the configuration, throw in a tag of a variable or something.
No.
Okay.
I'm curious now because a lot of this stuff render nicely, even in the copy area of the pages. I wonder if we would throw a liquid value onto this setting, what would happen? I haven't tried, but
Yeah, that's
guess it.
exactly what I was wondering. Yeah, and if it would, where would I get the value from? Like, where does the liquid, is it a
That's true.
like a parameter or something like that? Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's worth the try. Maybe we can try it. I don't know, this week at some point.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah.
you had another question in the chat, by the way.
Okay. Way to change the column names that default are shown. I don't think you can do that through here, through a configuration. But what I have done in the past is, if you go to options, you have an area for JavaScript and also CSS. Um, I don't know why they didn't put the CSS in the same place, but it is somewhere in here where you can override. Oh, no, no. So you override the CSS on the page level, the web page level. So that's usually what I do. I override columns and even columns that I just need to return for calculation, but I don't need to display. What I do is I hide them using CSS, or I use JavaScript to override their values. I don't know if that answered your question, Ibrahim. I hope it did.
Yeah,
Through
I did.
configuration, yeah, through configuration, you really can't do that, but you can
Well,
do that using.
are you just asking about the column header labels?
Yeah.
I thought that was the question. Yeah, the override column attribute seems to work.
Okay. So you don't need to use any coding to do that.
Oh, you do it here, right? The attribute column attribute changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Downside of that is you don't get the language. I just tested it. That's why I was wondering the same thing. And the only downside is you don't get like the translations like you do with the label overrides and the entity metadata.
Because they're not in a different language, it doesn't match, right?
Yeah. Well, it's cool. It's pretty simple. They give you the list of based off, like if you collab or expand that, you'll get a list of the attribute schema names based on the view you've selected. So it's pretty smart. It's pretty cool,
Mm-hmm.
but you only get a one label override. You don't get it per language.
Mm-hmm. It may be because of the way that it's presenting at the moment
Yeah.
on this editor.
Yeah.
Because it will default to the language of the user of Dynamics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. Right. Okay.
All right. So the last thing here on grids, I mean, there is quite a bit of stuff, but what I think it's cool is the ability to create that full crude experience for grids where you allow the users to create a new record, add the record, or even invoke a workflow from the portal. So I think that's really cool. I mean, I have done countless portals in my life now, and I think this is one of the best features of portals. Even though it's not completed in a way that we can extend it a lot. But I mean, when I'm demoing for customers or preparing my MVPs, it really helps. So when you hit create here, it will refer to forms, entity forms that you created within the same entity, so you can reuse them. Notice that this part is not, I shouldn't say very smart, but it's not calculating the type of form that you created. I only created one insert type form, and I'm trying to create an edit action. So in my head, this should never appear because it's not an edit type form. Okay. So if you want an edit capability, you have to create edit entity forms to be able to render it nicely. Okay, so I will remove this one now, and let's save this guy. So now I have a button here that allows me to create an account. Okay. Now, I think it's worth mentioning the reason why this form doesn't display nicely has nothing to do with portals itself. It's just the way that the portal is designed in Dynamics. So if you look at the form in Dynamics, most likely you have a tab with 3 columns. And within here, in this area, you have the timeline control, which is not available up until the time that you create the record. That's why the rendering here is not optimal. So a rule of thumb is if you're creating a form for portals, I'd say just use one tab, one column, and or maybe 2 columns, and try to display your controls nicely on the first go with components that really doesn't rely on creating the record before the components are displayed. All right, so that's essentially it for entity lists. I'm gonna show you a sample of an entity list in action. Hopefully I still have access to this particular portal. And then we'll quickly move on. Oh, dang it, 5 minutes only for web templates. We'll talk as much as we can and maybe do another session later on. So this search page is built completely using entity lists. See the look and feel is a bit different. I'm displaying some of the font awesome icons to present information. Some of the search is overwritten by jQuery. Just the stars, because you are forced to use a star to do wildcard searches. The side here is the metadata search, and the page that follows is pretty much our segue into web templates. This is built heavily using web templates, and that's what we're gonna talk about now in the next 5 minutes. Promise we'll do another one just for templates. So templates are essentially based off a language called Liquid, and Liquid was initially designed by Shopify, created by Shopify for their shop e-commerce platform. And I'm not sure what was the rationale on for the folks at ADX Studio, but they picked up a component developed in .NET, but yet using the Liquid as the language of choice for server-side programming for portals. Okay. In a nutshell, if you want to, all pages or almost every page on the portal is based off of a combination of HTML, JavaScript, and Liquid templates. So if you want to create one, you go to this area, the web templates area. Okay. And you can either start looking for examples that Microsoft have installed with using the templates that you selected, or you can start a new one. When you look at this, you notice that a lot of it will be very, it will remind you a lot of the classic ASP style of programming. So I'm just gonna pick one for us to look at. Let's look at this customer support homepage. You see that the first line is extends layout one column. So this layout one column is another web template record here. We'll look at that shortly. Then you have this text called blocks. Blocks are very similar to areas, and it reminds me, though this is not written in the same way, but it reminds me of the areas within master pages in ASP.NET Forms. So blocks are you can relate it that way. Okay, that include page copy. This is the page copy field from the web page that you are playing with. Down here, you see that it's using the request param created, signing it to a variable, and then doing different things. If statements, you see repetitions every now and then. There are specific tags, and we'll jump through individual ones shortly here, but specific tags to portal components or portal objects, if you will. I don't know if you recalled in the beginning of this presentation, we talked about content snippets. So this is what it's referring to. It's saying add this particular content snippet of type text, make it editable for the users who have admin rights on the portal. And then it does different things. So let's go back to this template here, the layout one column, because it's one of the base templates. Come on. Nim, I think they took that away from us. I used to be able to see that. The core ones. Oh well.
The layout one.
Yeah, it's just the name.
Yeah.
All right, so this is what it looks like. This is almost your base template. There are different ones. You notice that in this account page, I have a template that has two areas. So I think that's called layout two columns or something. But it gives you the core components for that. If you refer to one of these particular layouts and you invoke or you write one of the blocks, it will override whatever the particular layout was already displaying on the content here. Okay? So because we are short on time, I will show you one particular sample of the web templates that includes JSON. That will give you some information on how to write fetch and return data to your site. So keyword for fetch queries is fetch XML. Then you give it a name. You give your content. Now you can compose your fetch using dynamic values. Okay, you can add a filter that's based on a parameter on your URL, and then you can throw that in here. In the same fashion that I'm writing to the output of my page, we can actually throw stuff like this here with our request.params variable, if you will, okay? Now I assign the results of my query to this variable, and now I can iterate through it. So let's have a look at the results, what it looks like. Notice that I have on purpose defined the MIME type for my web template as application JSON. because I wanted to consume the results of this page in another component. So if I hit that page, this is what my result looks like. Now, keep in mind that the results here are also dependent on the amount of access that the logged on user has to the website. And what I'm talking about is essentially entity permissions. If the user is only able to see his own record based on entity permissions, you get just one line returned here. Okay, so let's quickly look at another example here. Again, it's JSON based, but this time I'm displaying data, but I wanted to consume the data yet on another web template. So my service is called, let me see if it's this one. No, not this one yet. So my web template, I call it case list table. I'm looking at all case records in Dynamics, everything that's set as open. And I am building a JSON that's going to be consumed by another web template to be displayed. Okay. Now, again, first command, fetch XML, then I get the result. Then I start to build the result here. One of the cool things within the for loop method is that you have access to different options. You can check if the item within your iteration is the first or the last. You can do verifications like that. So it works very handy for my JSON composition, because the component that will consume the service will throw an error if I have an additional comma at the end of my result set. So if I go to the portal and I get the, I wanna display the service here just to show you the results coming back. So that's my JSON result. Okay. Then I go back and I'm gonna open another template that now consumes that result. So it's a template that has both JavaScript and HTML, but doesn't have much of the liquid tags outside of the template part itself. So I'm saying that my template extends the column one template, which is the wide page one. Then in this block of my template, I want to use whatever the copy text is for my page. Then I'm I'm inserting references to JavaScript libraries that I want to use, then CSS. Then I create a table here, just a regular table object. And then I invoke my service, get the results as JSON. Then I create a data table object based on that, okay? So this is what the page looks like. What is the name of that page? So this is not an entity view. It's a JavaScript data table. Consuming results from a template that was built using liquid scripting. So far, so good. All right, so I want to refer to a page that will help you on your quest on liquid development. You can actually start on top, and I'll put this on the resources for this presentation as well. But you can start reading through this and see what's available. I mean, for portals, you have a series of objects that you can refer to. I use fetch to get the results that I needed for my query, but if you are dealing with one record only, you can use an object that allows for you to retrieve data directly from a particular entity in Dynamics. So there are lots of different objects available. So you see here entities dot account, so you can do entities and then refer to entities in Dynamics, give the ID and get the results that you need, so on and so forth. You have different tags for control flow, iteration, so on and so forth. And then you have filters. I think by far filters are my favorite here. I don't know if you agree with that, Jim, but I really like the way that it's created and how it makes it easier for you to do some of your composition, HTML composition of the results that you need. So, for example, this batch filter. Let's say that you have a component on your site that renders perfectly when you do ULs with maximum of two LIs, right? You can batch the iteration to with two, and then it will render two LIs within an UL, and then proceed for the next two. You know, if
give you a good example of that. I just discovered this when I was writing a recent post, and I did a bunch of work for the card views, right? So the card view for speakers in an event, and I wanted to make it flexible enough to have 2, 3, or 4, depending on the size. I was still working with it, and I did a bunch of logic, like you mentioned earlier, with a for loop, like I'm at the end, and I put in like a modulo for counting the row I'm on, and the batch removed like almost all of that code. It
I
basically
know,
gives you, it saved me so much time and hassle. I wish I would have seen it earlier.
yeah, no, it's amazing. I mean, I've worked with classic ASP in the past. And when I saw this, I was like, why no one did thought about that
Yeah.
then? Maybe I would have some hair left.
Oh yeah. No, I spent a lot of time just again, like, how do I know when to break a row? Because what if it's an odd number, things like that, and the batch
Yeah.
just hands it to you. The only thing I would suggest is this is a great place to start, and it gets into the extensions for dynamics. For example, dictionaries are not part of the baseline liquid that I've seen, right?
Hmm.
The available liquid objects are all focused on the dynamic stuff. But go to the one place I've spent a lot of time over the last like 2 years is looking at the Shopify documentation, because the
Hmm.
filters, totally agree, they're critical in working with your data. Just formatting a date, for example, right? There's a lot more on the liquid. It was at Shopify.github or whatever.
Hmm.
I should know it by now because I've been there so much. I'd suggest taking a look at this first and then going over to the other, and you'll get a lot more information in
That's right.
addition to this.
No, that's right. That's right. That's a great tip. The only thing I saw, Jim, is that some of the functions they don't translate well. For example, I was messing with dates yesterday, and I noticed that the year composition, if you want to 4 digits, it's not the same as the one from Shopify for some reason.
Nope,
So
totally agree.
yeah, but I
Yeah,
mean, I agree with you. There are lots of stuff that we will not find here. We have to refer to the original Liquid documentation.
I
Uh,
think a lot of math stuff is kind of skipped over here. It makes sense. They're focusing on the dynamic specific stuff that you really need, and the array stuff is critical when you're working with collections. Totally agree. But yeah, it's more like we had some math stuff, like concatenation of strings, things like that. They were a big help. But I totally agree. Some of them are from Shopify, and remember, like you said, this is ported over to what is a .liquid, I believe it's what it's called. So they did their implementation of it. The other is in Ruby, right?
yeah,
So yeah, there's the link for it. But honestly, it takes 2 minutes to try. That's a nice thing. Just try it out.
that's right.
But you will see, you're totally right on the date filter stuff, because they're going with .NET objects as opposed to probably working with how they handle UTC and things like that.
Hmm. But it's yeah, that's great information. So yeah, folks, I will place some of those links um, on the events page. That way you can all start looking at it. I will top here and commit to do another one later on in the year, maybe beginning of December. But what I will tell you is you want to memorize these names, and I don't say it jokingly. You really want to follow these guys because I mean they are posting a lot of crazy stuff on LinkedIn, cool stuff, deep, very deep knowledge of portals. So you want to follow them. And I joke here, I say follow the stars and me. But you wanna connect with Jim, Colin. Colin is Canadian, so the Canadian folks on the call, and Nicholas and Nick, they're all Canadian. So follow them. They always post cool stuff. And now that the tool is pretty much breaking the limitation of dynamics and going to more PowerApps, you see combination of posts touching different technologies, which is very cool. So follow them. I will post things here and there as well. Or if you have a question, if you want to ask, and I'll look for resources and reply to you. And last but not least, whatever you learn today, if you can pass that along to other people, I mean, I'm a strong believer of community. That's the only way we really grow. I mean, when we start to show what we learned and we discover that we didn't learn everything, so we go back and learn some more. So share this with people and just make this family grow even more. So I really appreciate your time today. If you have questions, suggestions, if you want to present stuff on a collaborative session, let's do it as well. I'm all for it. So I think I have a list of stuff that I'll be doing in November. If you are around any of the cities or online, please make sure to say hi. If you think that we can add different content to these sessions, let me know, and let's make it better for everybody. All right. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much. That was really great. Thank you, Victor.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jim, for the input, and keep the good stuff coming.
No, awesome stuff. This was great.
Awesome, man. Take care. Bye-bye.